Hi there. This video is going to look at the Hume-Adams talks. So, a bit of background then. The Hume-Adams talks sometimes is called the Hume-Adams Initiative, and this is a small but really important milestone in the Northern Ireland peace process, and this would eventually lead to the Good Friday Agreement of 1998. So, who were Hume and Adams? Well, John Hume was leader of the Nationalist Party in Northern Ireland, the SDLP, Social Democratic and Labour Party. And his party and John Hume himself have dedicated themselves to getting peace in Northern Ireland. They do aspire to an eventual United Ireland, but they're entirely focused on peaceful political ways in achieving this. Gerry Adams was actually the leader of the Republican Party Sinn Féin, and Sinn Féin are very different to the SDLP. So they too are dedicated to achieving a United Ireland. However, at this stage, they used, this the 1980s, they used a strategy called the Armalite and ballot box. So an Armalite is a machine gun, and a ballot box is what you vote for, okay, what you vote in. So the combined use of this violence, the Armalite, and the ballot box political campaigning, they hoped would actually get a United Ireland. Okay, so it's two competing views of how they're going to reach their goal. So John Hume started these secret talks with Gerry Adams, his political enemy, it has to be remembered, back in the late 1980s. Very brave decision because SDLP's main competitor, political competitor, was Sinn Féin. And the way they aspired to United Ireland was very different as well. So, hugely risky strategy. His own party, the wider public, would be horrified in the 1980s about the thought of John Hume talking to the leader of Sinn Féin, a party deeply connected to the IRA and much of the bloodshed in the Troubles. However, Hume believed the only way to bring about an end to the conflict in Northern Ireland was by all sides negotiating peacefully and politically. And he had to try to convince Adams that the way forward for Sinn Féin and for an eventual United Ireland was solely a peaceful one. So, what was discussed? Well, their talks were kept secret and lasted 8 months. Hume tries to convince Gerry Adams that the best way to achieve Sinn Féin's goals was a peaceful political way and that the gun had no place in Irish politics. He tried to convince Adams that it was his belief that the British government had actually little strategic or economic interest in Northern Ireland, and according to Hume, they were in fact neutral in their stance. He believed the British government wanted to work towards peace, but one which involved peaceful politics and the acceptance of consent and democracy in Northern Ireland. So, why is it important? Well, the talks were hugely controversial when the truth eventually did make its way into the newspapers in 1993. However, historians now actually believe that this played an immensely important part in the peace process. They formed some of the basis for the Downing Street Declaration in 1993. If you think about it, that's strategic interest, lack of strategic or economic interest. That was part of the statements that were put out by the British government to try to convince Sinn Féin to move into a peaceful political process. So it led to this Downing Street Declaration, and Sinn Féin did move eventually towards peaceful politics. And the British government, again, they accepted no selfish or strategic or economic interest in Northern Ireland. That statement would also go ahead to lead to the Provisional IRA ceasefire in 1994 and subsequently to the process which would head towards ultimately the Good Friday Agreement. So many thanks for watching. Hopefully this was useful.